There's a moment in Attack of the Clones that feels like the heroic turning point of the story. Over 200 Jedi ignite their lightsabers inside the Geonosian arena, surrounding the Separatists in what looks like the Order's most powerful show of force in centuries. It's framed like the cavalry arriving, the Jedi stepping in to save the day. But if you actually stop to think about the information the Jedi actually had at that moment, the decision makes no sense. Because as far as the Jedi Council knew, only one Jedi had been captured, Obi-Wan Kenobi. They did not know that Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala had gone to Geonosis. In fact, Anakin had been ordered specifically not to go, and the Jedi had no confirmed information that Obi-Wan was about to be executed. All they knew was that he had uncovered a Separatist conspiracy involving Count Dooku and Newt Gunray, and then he was captured. So the next question becomes unavoidable. Why would the Jedi Order send over 200 Jedi to save one singular prisoner? What the Jedi actually knew. When Obi-Wan sends his message from Geonosis, the information he provides is surprisingly limited. He confirms that the Separatists are building a massive droid army under the leadership of Count Dooku, and that the Trade Federation represented by Newt Gunray is involved in the plot against Padme. They then watch as Obi-Wan gets captured. That's it. No execution order. No public spectacle planned in an arena. No indication that a battle is imminent. From the Council's perspective, Obi-Wan is a prisoner to a faction that is not yet hostile against the Republic, and that distinction matters. Because the Jedi are not a military organisation at this point. They are peacekeepers operating within the Republic. Their entire role is based on diplomacy, investigation and mediation, not launching massive rescue operations behind enemy lines. So when the Council decides to intervene, the logical expectation would be a small extraction team, something quiet, something precise, send a few masters to infiltrate the planet, recover Obi-Wan and bring him home before the Separatists can move their army. Instead, the Jedi do the exact opposite. They deploy over 200 Jedi Knights and Masters directly into the heart of a Separatist stronghold. That's not a rescue mission, it's a military assault. And it's the first sign that the Order is already thinking like soldiers before the war even began. The arena was never the plan. The Jedi did not know about the arena execution. When the Jedi arrive on Geonosis, they are surprised to find Anakin and Padme chained in the arena alongside Obi-Wan. The Jedi had no idea they were there. The Jedi simply happened to arrive at the exact moment the prisoners were about to be executed, and because of that timing, the mission instantly escalates from a covert extraction into an open battle. But the deeper problem is this: there shouldn't have been that many Jedi in the first place. Even if the mission went perfectly, deploying 200 Jedi into hostile territory for one singular prisoner makes no strategic sense. It exposes an enormous percentage of the Order's active Knights to a single catastrophic failure, and that's exactly what happens. Once the battle droids activate and the Geonosian forces join the fight, the arena becomes a slaughter. If you were enjoying the Star Wars deep dive, it's practically all we do here, so you might want to stick around. The Catastrophe of Geonosis. The Battle of Geonosis is often remembered as the beginning of the Clone Wars, but it's also one of the greatest disasters in Jedi history. Estimates vary slightly depending on the source, but the general consensus is brutal. Out of the roughly 220 Jedi who entered the arena, only about 30 survived. That means somewhere between 170 and 190 Jedi were killed in the opening battle of the war. For an order that numbers around 10,000 across the galaxy, that's an enormous loss, especially because these weren't random Jedi scattered across systems. These were highly experienced Knights and Masters gathered together in one place. In other words, the Jedi concentrated their own leadership into one single battle, and lost most of them in a single afternoon. What makes it even stranger is how inconsistent it is to what we see later in the war. Throughout the Clone Wars, Jedi are shown cutting through battle droid armies with relative ease. Individual Jedi regularly defeat dozens, sometimes hundreds of droids in a single engagement. Even powerful enemies like General Grievous are frequently forced to retreat when confronted by just one or two Jedi. And yet, on Geonosis, 200 Jedi are overwhelmed. The explanation given in expanded lore is that Grievous was moving through the catacombs beneath the arena, hunting Jedi directly while the battle droids and Geonosian warriors surrounded the rest. But even with that explanation, the numbers still feel off. 200 Jedi should have been one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy, but instead they were nearly wiped out, and the Order never fully recovered. The moment the clones should never have been deployed. If sending 200 Jedi to Geonosis was already an extreme decision, the next move makes the situation even harder to defend, because once the battle begins to go wrong, Yoda arrives with something far more dangerous than reinforcements. He arrives with the clone army of the Republic, and that choice changes the situation completely, because the moment those troops land on Geonosis, this changes from a Jedi rescue mission to an all-out attack on a Separatist world. The real issue is that Yoda should never have even considered bringing an army in the first place. 200 Jedi is an extraordinary concentration of power. Individually, Jedi are shown cutting through battle droids in huge numbers, dismantling entire formations almost effortlessly. If the Order truly believed the situation required sending that many Jedi, then they should have believed that force was enough to resolve the crisis. Bringing an army on top of that isn't a contingency plan, it's an admission that the original decision never made sense. And if Yoda still felt some level of uncertainty about the outcome, the logical response would have been something far smaller. A limited battalion of clones as backup might have been defensible, a small support force to extract the Jedi if things spiraled out of control. But that's not what happens. Instead, thousands of freshly created soldiers arrive all at once, soldiers the Jedi have never fought beside before and barely understand. They're untested, their origins are suspicious, and the Order has had almost no time to evaluate who these troops actually are or who they ultimately answer to. That's what makes the decision so strange in hindsight. The Jedi don't just deploy the clones, they immediately rely on them. Within minutes of arriving, the clones are fighting alongside Jedi commanders in a full planetary battle, and the Republic suddenly has a standing army it didn't even know existed days earlier. A discovery that should have triggered massive caution instead becomes the foundation of the Republic's war effort. And this is the moment where the Jedi lose control of the situation entirely, because the second the clones enter the battlefield, the conflict changes from a desperate rescue mission into the opening engagement of a galactic war. The Republic has now invaded a Separatist world with a newly discovered army, and the Jedi are suddenly leading it. Before Geonosis, the Jedi were peacekeepers. After Geonosis, they are war generals. Once the clone army joins the battle, the Jedi begin directing troops, commanding formations and leading assaults across the battlefield. Within days, the Order has effectively become a leadership structure of the Republic's new military. But this is exactly the role the Jedi were never meant to fill. Their philosophy is built around balance, restraint and detachment from power. Leading armies requires the exact opposite mindset: aggression, strategy and victory at all costs. The Order didn't slowly drift into this position, they stepped into it themselves. And they did it because of one decision: sending 200 Jedi to Geonosis. Once that battle began, there was no turning back. The Jedi had become soldiers, and that was exactly the trap Palpatine had been setting all along. Why this was exactly what the Separatists needed. From the Separatist perspective, the Jedi attack on Geonosis was the perfect catalyst. Think about it from their side. A massive force of Jedi, the Republic's most powerful enforcers, suddenly appears on their planet and launches a coordinated strike against their leadership. Then a clone army arrives and invades the system. To anyone already skeptical of the Republic's authority, that looks like outright aggression. In other words, the Jedi didn't just trigger a battle, they legitimized the Separatist narrative that the Republic was becoming oppressive. The moment the Jedi ignited their lightsabers in that arena, the political conflict became a full-scale war. And once the war began, everything else fell into place. The clone army expanded, the Jedi became generals, and Palpatine gained emergency powers that would eventually allow him to transform the Republic into the Empire. The decision that cost the galaxy. When fans talk about the fall of the Republic, the focus usually goes to the major moments. Order 66, the rise of Darth Vader, the beginning of the Empire. But those were the end of the story. The real turning point came years earlier on Geonosis, because the Jedi made a decision that day that they couldn't undo. They sent an overwhelming force to rescue one captured knight, and in doing so, they exposed hundreds of their own to a battle they didn't fully understand. Nearly 200 Jedi died, the clone army entered the war, and the Jedi Order stepped into the role of military commanders, a role that would ultimately destroy them. The tragedy is that the choice probably felt justified in the moment. Rescue Obi-Wan, stop the Separatists and protect the Republic. But that decision gave the war exactly what it needed to begin. The Jedi thought they were saving one of their own. Instead, they started a conflict that would cost them the galaxy. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe and let's uncover the galaxy's greatest secrets together. Thanks for watching.